have oppositions coming to the promise that God has given Abraham. So I want you to think of your own promise, because we gave a little bit of thought of that at the beginning. Has God ever promised you something? Some of you are still waiting for the fulfillment of that promise. God promised Abraham something, and we would think, well, I guess that would just happen. But it turns out that it's not actually easy to lay a hold of God's blessing every time. You see, Abraham has issues. Number one, we run into these obstacles to the blessing. For one, the land that was promised to Abraham was filled with Canaanites. And you could ask Joshua and his 12 spies if that was much of a problem or not. These were formidable people, excessively evil, terrifying, giants, warlike. Nobody would want to go up against the people that inhabited the land that God was promising to Abraham. Well, that's a problem. There were obstacles in the way of Abraham experiencing the fulfillment of God's promise and blessing. Here was another obstacle. Sarah was barren. Sarah was not able to have children. Now, that would be a problem if Sarah and Abraham were in their prime. But Sarah and Abraham were not in their prime. God gave this promise to Abraham and Sarah after the age that was humanly possible to have children. So now we have yet another obstacle. Not only is Sarah barren, but even if she was not barren, she's not going to have children. Now she's past the time of, past that age that she's able to bear children. So there's all these obstacles. Here's a bizarre one. It's been 25 years since Abraham received the promise from the Lord, and still no children. You would think with that promise in their old age that God would need to get that program running pretty quickly. 25 years, and there's no great nation, there's no land, there's not even a single child yet. We have problems. So in that time period, Abraham and Sarah fell into bad thinking, which a lot of us have fallen into ourselves. They tried to help the Lord with an impossible scenario. How many of you think that the Lord needs your help with the impossible scenarios you're facing? See, this is always a bad idea. When we think that, you know what, I think God is faltering. You know, maybe he tried, he gave it a whirl and it just didn't work, but maybe if I came in with the assist, he'd have what he needed to fulfill this promise so that I could have the blessing. As silly as that sounds, a lot of us have taken that path before. Well, Abraham and Sarah are no different. So in this 25-year stint of no children from Sarah, they come up with the bright idea. Why doesn't Abraham use Sarah's female servant, and she's of childbearing age, we could have children there, and then God's promise would be fulfilled. Well, that seemed to make sense to Abraham and Sarah. I don't think that impressed God very much. So poor Hagar ends up bearing a child to Abraham, and that child's name is Ishmael, and that will become a very important fact. It's important you know that as the biblical story and narrative unfolds. That's going to create a lot of problems between the promised child, Isaac, that would come from Sarah, and the nations that would come from Hagar, from Ishmael. In fact, we still see that playing out today. Through Isaac, we have the Jews, and through Ishmael, we have the Arabs. And the two do not get along to this day. Disobedience and our lack of faith always has consequences. Many of them long-term. And not only to ourselves, they can hang on for generations. So there's been a lot of problems with Abraham trying to receive the blessing that God promised to him. So if we could at least say this, we can learn from Ishmael, that fiasco with Hagar, that we should never try to bring about the blessings that we want from the Lord in a worldly manner. We should never go around God's way of doing things to attain God's blessing. We try this a lot. Don't do it. Do not do it. So let's think about this. As you're thinking about the promises that God has given to you, as you're thinking about the frustration that often comes when we try to attain the promises and the blessing that God has given to us, we must not become discouraged by opposition. In fact, I hope that you learn tonight that's often part of the journey. There's much to learn through the obstacles and the opposition that we encounter in seeking after God's blessing.